What I Learned on My Summer Vacation. A Naturalist Journal by Mrs. Smith. This summer I got to spend time in one of my favorite places on earth, the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. I visit there whenever I can because I love the mountains, the lakes, and in particular the beautiful wildflowers. But this year my goals were a little bit different. I went to learn as much as I could about the geology, the habitats, and the amazing array of life that can be found there. One of my teachers was to be Jack Laws, a scientist and illustrator who visited our school last year. We started by taking a walk and making a sort of treasure map in our journals. First we encountered fringed pine sap, a parasite that grows on the roots of trees. Then we looked closely at a columbine flower, including its seed pod and leaf. And as good scientists, we were sure to note our location, the date and time, and the conditions around us. The next morning we entered a field of wildflowers, and we were challenged to observe and draw one plant so accurately that a partner could come back later and find our exact plant. It was tricky, and it meant looking for all the details. But in the end, my buddy was able to find my plant, and I was able to find hers. Early the next morning, we toured a model Miwok village with Ian, who was an expert on Native Americans. I took careful notes because the information was fascinating, and I wanted to remember every bit. But then I realized I could make drawings too, which could give me even more detail and really help me remember. As we continued our tour of the roundhouse, I began to draw more and write less. The more I drew, the more details I noticed, and the better I could remember them. Later that morning, Jack asked us to do something that was really difficult for me. A deer entered the meadow, and he asked us to draw it. Of course, the deer kept moving, and I got really frustrated. Just as I would start a sketch, she would move, and I would have to start a new drawing. But looking back at all the little sketches, I can see that no one sketch is very good, but all together they give a good picture of how that deer was acting. Next, we broke into groups to do a quick check on the health of a nearby creek. My group's job was to identify the aquatic insects and fish living in the creek. As we discussed watersheds afterwards, I was distracted by the beautiful scarlet monkey flower growing next to me and decided to sketch it while I listened. In the afternoon, we did an experiment about carbon dioxide and temperature changes to help us understand climate change better. So now numbers and data began to appear in my journal, along with words and pictures. Next, we did an exercise called Zoom In, Zoom Out. First, I drew a yellow monkey flower, exactly its natural size. But then I wanted to show the details of the inner parts. It was important to label these drawings with the scale, so someone would know which was life size and which was drawn 4 times its natural size. Then it was time to zoom out and show the whole plant. And again, the scale was important, since it had to be drawn 1/4 its size to fit into my sketchbook. The next morning I hiked to the top of Sentinel Dome to get a good view of Half Dome, one of the most famous pieces of granite on Earth. I found a good boulder to sit on and pulled out my sketching gear. Although there were a lot of people around, they faded from my awareness as I focused on the beautiful view before me. Further along on my hike, I came across a plant I'd never seen before. I searched to see if I could find an open flower to help me identify it. The plant was nearly as tall as I was. I wanted to get a really good sketch of it so that back in camp, I could ask an expert what I'd seen. Since I couldn't find any open flowers, I decided to draw a single bud life-size, or using a 1:1 scale. I did that from the side and top views. I started out to draw the whole plant, which I thought would be pretty simple, but it turned out to be more complicated than I thought. At the top was one bud. Then the next layer had 4 flower buds evenly arranged around the stem. The next layer had sets of 2 buds on each of the 4 sides. And the next row had sets of 3 buds on each side, so I thought I was understanding the pattern. But the next row had 4 sets, but they included a single bud and a set of 3 connected together. In the next row, each set had 2 single buds, then 5 connected together, and continued to get more complicated as I traveled down the plant. Just as I thought I was finished, I discovered an open flower toward the bottom of the plant. Since flowers are the easiest way to identify a plant, I wanted to get a good drawing of it. The closer I looked, the more complicated it became. It had 4 petals and 4 stamens, and what looked like a double pistil in the center. But the petals had a hairy white surface and dark purple spots, and there was another green structure sitting on top. It took me quite a while to get all those details down on paper. Finally, I decided to make some notes on where I'd found the plant, and drew a map so someone else could find it too. The next day we walked through the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. We ate lunch in front of a grand old tree which had been scarred by fire. Of course I had to sketch it, and today I decided to use black pen, but then I wanted to get out my watercolors and add color to my drawing. The granite of Cathedral Peak towers over the lake below, which shares its name. I didn't have much time, but the peak was so spectacular I wanted a sketch. A few moments with a Sharpie was all it took. Next I looked to the granite ridges surrounding the lake and grabbed my sketchbook. Another few minutes with my Sharpie, and it was imprinted in my sketchbook and in my memory. As we ate our lunch, there were thousands of blue damselflies clinging to the grasses and covering the surface of the lake. The early morning brought a spectacular view of Yosemite Falls, one that had to be sketched. I found these small drawings, which Jack calls landscapitos, a wonderful way to record scenery when time is short. Even though the valley floor was crowded, just a short hike beyond the bridge brought us to this lovely spot along Tenaya Creek. And of course the opportunity to sketch. This time I decided to try using only watercolors, laying down color without drawing with pencil or pen first. Getting the water right was challenging. And then it was back to camp and a tour of the giant sequoia grove with my sketching buddies. This pine drop plant posed very nicely for us and found its way into my sketchbook. This giant sequoia, called the grizzly giant, was also cooperative about standing still. Of course, it's been growing in the same spot for 2,700 years. I had plenty of time to sketch the whole tree and then the detail of some of its ancient branches. This raven visited our group in hopes of some free food. He got his portrait drawn instead. In the creek near camp, a family of beavers had moved in and built a dam. They used the boulders already in the creek to help hold their logs and sticks in place. That evening, the diurnal beavers were busy, and we watched and sketched their work. Since there was lots of action, Jack suggested we draw a series of pictures like a cartoon to show the steps. It seems when you're sketching animals, you often get the best view from the rear. After the beavers had gone in for the night, I drew this map showing all the different ways they had changed their environment. My week at camp was over, But fortunately, I had another week to spend in the Sierras hiking with my family and friends. Everywhere I went, I carried my trusty red sketching bag and pulled out my tools whenever the opportunity arose. Sometimes I sketched grand mountains and beautiful lakes, and at others, the corn lilies at my feet. This family of mallards we met at Leaky Boat Cove entered my sketchbook, as did the cove itself and the plants nearby. Holly Falls was another spectacular spot, and it gave me another opportunity to practice drawing moving water. Scarlet Gilia is one of my favorite wildflowers. Its nickname is Rocket. Can you see why? Scarlet Gilia is perfectly designed to be pollinated by hummingbirds. The red color attracts them, and the long tube is perfectly shaped for them to stick their beaks down to get nectar. And while they do that, they move pollen from flower to flower. As I sat drawing the rocket plants, something unexpected happened. This large black bee came along and wanted some nectar. He was way too big to fit down the tube of the flower, so he just went around to the side and chomped a hole in it and got the nectar that way. He got his nectar, but he didn't help the flower by moving any pollen from one to the other. Does that seem fair? One of our adventures that week was to hike to a new place called Spencer Lakes, along a trail which wasn't very well marked and was hard to find. Of course, after all that hiking, I had to take a swim, along with taking the time to sketch. In this sketch, I also made a map so we could find our way back another time. My last morning in the mountains, I spent in one of my favorite meadows, along a creek which happens to be just below a lake called Smith Lake. This elegant swallowtail butterfly came by to get some nectar from the Topheldia plant I was drawing. Can you see its long tubular tongue extending into the flower? I would have missed his visit had I not been sitting so quietly, drawing. This bog asphodel seemed like a very simple flower, until I zoomed in closely and found so many detailed parts. Then it was time to leave the meadow, to return home, to work, and to school. Although I left the mountains behind, I brought back my journal, my memories, and what I learned while I was there. When I look through my journal now, all those beautiful places come rushing back. And even when I don't have my journal handy, the memories are so much stronger because I took my time really looking and seeing all the details of what was around me. My red bag now hangs by the front door, always ready for the next opportunity to sit in nature, to observe, and to draw.